I just quit the startup where I've worked for the last 9 months. And I want to tell you about the smartest software engineer I think I've ever worked with at this startup. I left not because I didn't like the company or because I was fired or laid off or anything like that. Nothing of the sort. I have a business called Parsity where I mentor software engineers to get into software. Trying to work at a really, really small startup while we're getting more students and I've had to dedicate more one on one time for them just isn't working. I need a larger company where I can have more predictable hours and workload. So that's why I'm leaving. But working here in the last 9 months, I've learned more than in the last 4 years. And I want to do a case study while it's fresh in my mind of the smartest software engineer I've worked with thus far. I think there's four important lessons we can take away from this individual. Lesson one, it is not about the tools, it's about the craft. This guy came from Amazon. He didn't really know JavaScript or TypeScript, but the whole code base was written in JavaScript and TypeScript, and it was really, really good. Now, you can say, well, yeah, AI can just make everything nowadays. And yeah, absolutely. You better believe we were all using AI on this really small team. It was me, him, and one other woman all working together to build a massive full stack application, leveraging AI, TypeScript, Postgres, and all the other cool kid technology that you've probably read about online. Really fun place. But the funny thing was, he didn't actually know these technologies that well, but he wrote code like he did. And I was always shocked, like, how do you know this stuff? He focused a lot more on principles instead of syntax. Large language models are great at abstracting the syntax away from coding so you can like know how to write code and you know kind of what looks good. So he was big on principles like single responsibility principle, open close principle, don't repeat yourself. Simple things that can help inform how you can write a cohesive, coherent, and scalable code base. One of the biggest lessons that I took away from this guy was that working code is just not good enough. Now, this is something that I thought I really took to heart, honestly. But I remember the first feature that I wrote at this company. The first week I got there, I wanted to make a good introduction. So I'm like, give me a ticket. I want to start working like right now. So week one, I got something delivered, like a pretty moderate sized feature. It got so much feedback in the peer review that I thought maybe I'm going to get fired. I was like, whoa, this is a lot more than I'm used to. I came from a company where I was essentially the technical authority, for better or for worse. I wasn't learning a lot. I didn't have anybody to look up to. At this place, I certainly was not the technical authority. This guy was like, I think, near principal level at Amazon, or he was somewhere near like the technical leadership level at Amazon. So, really high up there, really incredibly smart, and just a person that you'd be lucky to work with. And I was lucky to work with him. So during this peer review, he'd look at the code, and honestly, throughout all my peer reviews, he'd look at the code and have a ton of comments. And just because something worked and we're at a startup and we need to move fast doesn't mean it can't be high quality. So he'd always push me to write things better. What I'd see in his own peer reviews that when he touched code, he'd also make sure the code that was around it worked a little better, taking extreme ownership of the code base. Not only because there was a few of us on the team, but just because when you do that kind of thing, it not only makes the lives of your teammates better, but it also helps you get in that mind state of like, yeah, this is our code base. We need to maintain it. If something doesn't look right or it could be cleaned up, whether it's just renaming a variable to something better, changing a file name, or doing a small refactor while you're there, why not do it? These little incremental improvements can save you tons of time down the road. And if you're learning to code and you're in your own code base, do this as you're going back to your code. Go back to code you've written and see what you need to change. And when you're learning to code, you should be making enough progress in between these periods that you should have a lot of things that you now know you need to change. So go back and fix up your janky ass code that you wrote like 3 months ago when you're on Codecademy or something like that. Same rule applies when you're 10 years into your career like me. If you see code that you didn't write but doesn't look quite right, fix it. Another takeaway was this guy was obsessed with metrics. Too often, I talk about vibes a lot because I feel like that's what the whole world is running on nowadays, like vibe coding. Oh, is this a good technology? Well, my vibes tell me it is. Why am I choosing this? Well, because you need to have a reason behind things. So he was big into collecting metrics, seeing, is this feature we just wrote, is this actually moving the needle? Are customers using it? Hey, Brian, can you check our database and see how often people are using this feature? Let's see what the comments are within our feedback tool. let's see how fast this really is. Let's see how slow this really is. Let's get metrics and look at them to understand what we should do next. He was very data driven. And this taught me a lot because honestly, at the previous company where I was at, I was not as data driven. And that was a big misstep on my part. I was thinking sometimes, hey, this seems like a good idea. Like the website should be faster, right? Why should it be faster? Because it should be. Fast is always better, right? But if you're chasing metrics without actually knowing if they move the needle, then you could be chasing the wrong metric and going in the wrong direction really, really fast. So I like the fact that he was data driven, think, what do we really want to achieve? Are the metrics telling us that we are achieving these things? And I think this can be applied to people that are just learning to code. Don't just go off vibes. Like just because you read that your favorite influencer is saying you need to learn X, Y, and Z, there very could there very well could be reasons to do that. But at the same time, question why? Why am I doing this? Why does this matter? Why are people using React? Why are people using Next.js? Why are people using vanilla JavaScript and HTML and CSS? Is there a benefit to one over the other? Don't just go off vibes. Dig a little bit deeper and understand why you're doing what you're doing. Very last thing that made this guy stand out tremendously on this small team is that he was business minded. He was obsessed with the business. He was not just a guy writing code and writing really performant code and doing excellent peer reviews. He was doing all those things. But on top of that, he would recommend books for me he would recommend books to me about how the business worked. We were in the procurement industry, which is an industry that not many people outside of procurement really know about. Basically, how do people buy the goods and services that we use in a place like the United States? They go out and find things like in China or Africa or Latin America, and they get those goods into the United States. These people have to go out and source those things. That's what our product was built around. How do we build a good product if we don't understand the problems of that particular population, that segment of that type of industry? So he was reading about this kind of stuff, learning about it, and becoming kind of obsessed with our customer and the things that they really needed in order for them to have a good experience on the site. He understood how the company was trying to make money and had opinions about how it could. This is invaluable. Whether you're at a really small startup where this is basically expected that you have an opinion on things, or you're at a really big company, this can make you stand out tremendously. I think more people need to be business minded in in addition to being developer minded. Developer minded is like, I need to get this feature out and it's going to work and I'm going to write tests and all this kind of stuff for it. Business minded is, how does that fit into the larger business context? Can I articulate how this is going to help the business make money? If you are doing features where you have zero clue whether they're helping the business make money or reach any of its goals, that's probably a sign you need to stop and think, what am I doing and what's the importance? And see if you can find a way to get into more important areas of the business where you're less likely to be expendable. And very last thing, one of the major takeaways here is that I've had this experience at multiple startups where I've worked. I've worked at one really small startup before this. I've worked at a much larger startup after that. And then I worked at a really big Fortune 500 company. I've written a bit about my big fish in a small pond career strategy. Basically, how after you go to a really small company like this and you learn a ton, you could go to a larger company where the expectations are less and the engineering quality a lot of times is a little less, and you can stand out tremendously because you've learned so much at the startup. Now, all startups aren't created equal. I've gone to startups in the San Francisco Bay Area with really top notch people, and they've helped accelerate my career. I only spent 10 months at this last place, but I've learned more about AI, about TypeScript, about Next.js, and really got more into the back end than I had in the last 4 years of working at a big, boring company. Now, I had a great time at that big, boring company. I loved it. And if I hadn't got laid off, I'd probably still be there. But this was an amazing learning experience. And I think that more people need to consider that in their careers, that at some point you can't just coast, that either you're going to have to jump into the deep end using technology outside of work and really force yourself to get stretched in order to keep up with things, or you might want to consider going to a startup where you can kind of get that breadth of knowledge that you may not be able to get at a larger company. There's pros and cons to this, and I have an episode actually where I go over What's it like working at a Fortune 500 versus a mid-sized startup versus a small startup? It's not for everybody. It's quite unstable, but you can learn a hell of a lot. And I'm really grateful for the time that I had. Anyway, I hope that's really helpful for you. Maybe you can take some lessons away from this very smart engineer that I worked with, and hopefully you can be that person for somebody else in the near future. Anyway, see you around.